All right, today we're going to take a deep dive into one of literature's most famous stories, A Christmas Carol. But we're going to use it to tackle a huge question about ourselves. Is being a good person, being compassionate, is that a simple, logical choice, or is it actually this constant, brutal fight against our own selfish wiring? That's what we're calling the Scrooge Enigma.
So, at the very heart of Scrooge's story, you've got this massive philosophical clash. On one hand, you have the idea that kindness is just, well, obvious. It's the rational thing to do, the only path that really makes sense for a society. But then on the other hand, what if it's not that easy? What if being kind requires this constant, conscious, really difficult battle against our most primal, our most selfish instincts?
Okay, so here's our game plan for unpacking all of this. First, we'll lay out the Scrooge Enigma itself. Then we'll look at two totally opposite arguments. The first one is that kindness is just a logical no-brainer. The second is that it's this incredibly hard lizard brain override. After that, we'll apply this all to Scrooge's little, let's call it, shock to the system. And we're going to wrap up with a really stark, realist challenge that kind of throws a wrench in the whole thing.
All right, let's jump right in. Section 1. The Scrooge Enigma. Before we can even get to Scrooge's big change, we have to ask ourselves, why does this story still hit so hard? Centuries later, what's the fundamental question it's forcing all of us to confront?
See, what the story is really suggesting is that moving from being totally selfish to actually being empathetic, well, it's not just a switch you flip. It's this deep psychological transformation. It's literally the thing that separates a miserable life from a joyful one. So that's the real question, right? What does that transformation actually look like? Is it a light bulb moment, a sudden logical realization? Or is it a really profound, really difficult internal struggle?
Okay, so let's tackle that first big argument. This is what we're calling the no-brainer proposition. And the idea here is that being compassionate isn't just, the nice thing to do. It's actually the most logical, even mathematically superior choice for absolutely everyone involved.
This way of thinking, which you find in a lot of spiritual and philosophical traditions, basically says that living a life based on conflict and mistrust, well, it's just fundamentally irrational. It's a bad strategy. It makes no sense. Playing what's called a cooperative game is just, plain and simple, a better way to live for everybody.
And here's where it gets really fascinating. This isn't just some philosophical hand-waving. There's actual math to back this up. It comes from a field called game theory, which is all about analyzing strategies in competitive situations. And the most famous example of this is a classic thought experiment called the prisoner's dilemma.
Okay, this chart really breaks it down perfectly. Just follow the logic here. Let's say you're prisoner A. If you betray your partner while they stay quiet, hey, you walk free. Seems like a great deal, right? But if you both think that way and betray each other, you both get 5 years in the slammer. The only way to get the best possible outcome for the group, just 1 year each, is through mutual trust. It's cooperation. It proves that in the long run, being antagonistic is just a losing game for everyone.
And look, this is not just some abstract academic exercise. We're talking more than 15 Nobel Prizes in economics have been won for work in game theory. And time again, the research reinforces the exact same conclusion. In any long-term situation, cooperation just works better. It consistently produces the best results for everyone involved.
So, here's the key takeaway. Cooperation isn't just about dodging a bullet and avoiding the worst-case scenario. It's the only way to get to the best one. And that's exactly what Scrooge finds out, isn't it? The second he stops playing his selfish, antagonistic game and jumps into a cooperative one, he finally experiences joy. So from this point of view, his big transformation wasn't a miracle. It was just him finally waking up to what should have been obvious all along.
All right, but what if that whole no-brainer idea is completely wrong? Let's flip the script and look at the powerful counter-argument. This perspective says that compassion isn't logical at all. In fact, it's an incredibly difficult override of what our brains are hardwired to do from birth, which is to be selfish.
See, this view basically says that kindness is not our default setting, not by a long shot. It actually requires the newest, most evolved part of our brain to constantly fight back against the commands coming from the most ancient, most powerful, and most primal part of us. And this is a great breakdown of that internal tug-of-war. So deep down, you've got your limbic system, people call it the lizard brain, and it is just screaming these primal commands. Eat, defend, reproduce. It's all about survival, super selfish. Then you have your frontal lobe, the more advanced, rational part of you, which is capable of reason and empathy. Compassion then is the result of that frontal lobe actively wrestling down and suppressing those selfish lizard brain impulses.
So if you look at it this way, Scrooge wasn't some kind of evil anomaly. He was just living in his default state, completely driven by that limbic system. I mean, think about a toddler, right? Their first instinct is always mine. Sharing and empathy, those are skills. They have to be taught, they have to be learned. It's a huge victory for our higher brain to overcome those base instincts.
Okay, so now we have these two completely opposing ideas on the table. Is compassion a logical no-brainer, or is it a constant lizard brain override? So, how do we use this to understand what actually happened to Ebenezer Scrooge?
Well, what the story itself seems to suggest is that for someone as deeply stuck in their ways as Scrooge, logic alone wasn't going to cut it. You couldn't just show him a prisoner's dilemma chart. His selfishness was way too deep. No, he needed something profound, a shock to the system, to forcibly jolt his frontal lobe into action and break that lizard brain's stranglehold.
And that's what the ghosts are, right? They're basically a form of intense, supernatural psychoanalysis. They drag him through his own life, forcing him to look at where his misery started, see the real-time damage his cruelty is causing, and then finally, confront the lonely, meaningless death that awaits him. It's a total demolition of all his psychological defenses.
And what's just incredible is that Dickens was writing this stuff decades before Freud was even on the scene. He's basically laying out this proto-psychoanalytic idea that real change isn't just deciding to be better. It's a breakthrough, and it often requires a really painful deep dive into your own past to change your future.
But hold on, we've got one more stop. And this is where things get, well, a lot darker. We're calling it the realist challenge. And this is a perspective that looks at both of those other arguments, the logical one and the brain one, and says you're both dangerously naive.
This brings us to a really stark objection, and it's articulated so powerfully by the writer Cormac McCarthy. His whole body of work basically asks, what if the world isn't built for cooperation? What if it's fundamentally a dog-eat-dog place, where kindness isn't a strength, it's a weakness, a liability?
Yeah, McCarthy's argument is pretty chilling. He says that this whole idea that we can improve as a species, that we could all live in harmony, isn't just a nice thought. He says it's a really dangerous idea. And why is it dangerous? Because believing in it makes you soft. It makes you vulnerable in a world that is, at its core, brutal and competitive.
So this is the ultimate philosophical showdown. On one side, you've got Dickens and his gospel of love, this optimistic belief that the world could be a better place if we just embraced cooperation. And on the other side, you've got McCarthy's brutal realism, which says the world is a dog-eat-dog reality, and all that idealism does is set you up to be exploited and destroyed.
I mean, the realist's argument is brutally simple and powerful. In a world full of predators, dreaming about peace is just a good way to become prey. To them, the single strongest argument against the idea of cooperation is just, well, opening your eyes and looking at the world. In a world of wolves, the sheep isn't enlightened, it's just dinner.
And that leaves us right here with this huge unresolved question. Is the world that Scrooge wakes up to on Christmas morning a world of mutual regard and joy? Is that a logical destination we should all be working towards? Or is it a dangerous delusion? A beautiful fairy tale that makes us forget the brutal dog-eat-dog logic that actually runs the world? The answer to that question? Well, it doesn't just define a character in a book. It defines how we see everything.